Good morning, everyone. I'm Andre Lennon, Group Manager at ESP Associates, and proudly serve on the NCEDA Board of Directors. I'm excited to be your MC for today's webinar, Rebuilding Western North Carolina, Infrastructure Recovery Efforts and Lessons Learned. We're happy to have you with us. Before starting the program, I'd like to acknowledge NCEDA's annual sponsors, whose logos you'll see on the screen now. These companies and organizations support every component of NCEDA's expansive mission and our growing body of programs. We thank all of these sponsors for their generous support. Webinars that benefit our membership, like this one, result from their support. During today's webinar, we'll hear from local and regional utility providers in Western North Carolina as they share critical updates on recovery efforts following Hurricane Helene. Our panelists will offer insight into the ongoing challenges they're facing, the progress that's been made, and the work that still lies ahead. We'll also explore how these organizations are planning for the future, strengthening infrastructure, enhancing resilience, and preparing for the growing impacts of natural disasters. Our panel will be moderated by Dan Warwick, Senior Project Manager, Land Site Industrial Practice Leader for BGE, and also a fellow NCEDA board member. Now, let's introduce our panelists. First up, Jennifer Bennett. Jennifer is the Government and Community Relations Manager at Duke Energy Corporation, where she has over 9 years of experience in stakeholder engagement, hydro licensing, and water strategy. Since joining Duke Energy in 2016, she has served in several roles, including project manager in water strategy, hydro licensing, and lake services. She holds a master's degree from NC State University and a bachelor's degree from Western Carolina University. Next is David Melton. David is the Director of Water Resources for the City of Asheville, where he leads efforts to manage and maintain the city's water systems and infrastructure. With a strong background in public utilities and organizational leadership, he brings strategic oversight and operational expertise to the department. He holds a bachelor's degree from Anderson University in South Carolina. And our final panelist is Adam Sturr. Adam is the Utilities Director for the City of Hendersonville, where he oversees the planning, operations, and infrastructure of the city's utility service. With over 7 years of experience in Hendersonville, including nearly six as a utilities engineer, he brings technical expertise and leadership to this role. Adam holds a bachelor's degree from NC State University. Just a note that we will have time at the end for questions. You can enter any of those questions in the Q&A box during the panel discussion, and we'll address those at the end. Now, Dan, we'll get started with the panel discussion. Thank you all for being with us. It's all yours, Dan.
Thanks for that introduction, Andre. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dan Warwick with BGE, and I wanted to thank you all for joining us today. I have the honor of moderating this panel discussion regarding Western North Carolina infrastructure recovery efforts. I want to start and wanted to thank all of our panelists for taking the time to be with us today to speak to this very important topic. The goal of this webinar is to provide a platform for our local and regional utility providers to describe the issues they've been dealing with since the hurricane and what progress has been made, as well as the struggles they still face. This webinar will provide our attendees and NCEDA members a chance to hear about what's been going on with infrastructure recovery in Western North Carolina, as well as some potential lessons learned for them to take home. With that, let's get to our panelists. Jennifer, David, Adam, thanks again for joining us. Let's get going. All right, to start and to provide context to the audience, would each of you take a few minutes and provide a brief, as possible, summary of the major issues you all have been dealing with since the hurricane up until now? And Adam, if you don't mind, if you want to get us started.
Yeah, sure. Good morning. So Adam Sturr, Utilities Director with the City of Hendersonville. Just to provide a quick background of our utility system, we serve public or drinking water to all of Henderson County. We serve a population of about 80,000 people on the water side. We also provide sewer services to about 25,000 people around Hendersonville proper. Initially, when the storm was forecasted, I saw a lot of words in the media and weather reports as catastrophic and worst of a lifetime. Um, I don't think a lot of us knew the impacts and how extreme that weather event or this weather event would have been at that time. We took our normal precautions that we do for all events like this. We fill our water tanks up to the top. We also tip off our emergency generators with fuel, and that was normal precautions. The day of the storm, the biggest impact to our water system initially was we lost one of our water sources. We have 3 total water sources that are not treated water that go to the treatment plant. Well, one of the sources is a pump station and intake on a river nearby, and it was flooded. We were forced to shut down that facility to try to maintain the electrical components. So that system or that intake was offline for a little over 1 day. So we were unable to put out full capacity of our treatment plant. We were only putting out about a third to a half of the amount of water that we needed to be putting out for that amount of time. On the other side, we had a lot of water pipes out in the distribution system. That's finished water that is drinking water. When roads washed out, pipes broke, and we had leaks, water leaks everywhere across the system. You can kind of think of a water system as a bucket with holes in it. Normally, we can fill the bucket faster than the water that is coming out of the bucket, but during Helene, we could not fill the bucket as quickly as it was draining. So all of our tanks and reservoirs were draining faster than we could fill them. One of the big issues was we could not locate a lot of these main leaks. Several of them occurred under where we have pipes that cross rivers under the river. The rivers were 10, 15, 20 feet higher than they normally were, and we had broken pipes under the river. Under that water, we could not see them. We could not find them. We made a decision pretty early on. We kind of knew general areas where we had these large main breaks. So we made a decision on the first day to just shut off water service to probably about 15 to 20% of our customer base in these large geographical regions to try to maintain water service in the core system. And that decision was proved to be very beneficial and helped us out in the long term. We did issue a system-wide pressure advisory or a boil water advisory to all of our customers because we didn't really know what was going on the first couple of days. And after about 5 to 6 days, we had 95% of our water customers back in water. And then about 2 weeks later, we had 100% of our water customers back in water, and they could all drink that water. On the sewer side, anytime there's a large rain event, rainwater, groundwater, it will get into the sewer pipes, and then it goes to the treatment plant. During a rainfall event of this scale, most of the water that was in our sewer pipes was not sewer; it was creek water or storm water. So we had issues with the pipes just could not serve that amount of water. Also, our sewer treatment facility is located along a river because that's where everything drains. And we experienced severe flooding at that facility in some of the electrical rooms and main pump station buildings. That facility did not operate for 11 days following the storm. And our folks, I will say, did a remarkable job replacing equipment in a short amount of time, in 11 days, to get that facility functional again. After it was powered up again, it still took another about 2 weeks for us to regain full treatment process for sewer. It's a very biological process, and the bacteria that are used to treat the wastewater need oxygen to maintain their life essentially. And we could not put oxygen in those tanks without power. So our population pretty much diminished. So we had to reestablish that. Takes time. Overall, I think the biggest and other impacts to this was, we lost cell phone communication, very difficult to communicate with our crews out in the field. as we're regaining service, we became very reliant on cell phones. So that was difficult. Also, our online maps where we know where all of our pipes are, they're all underground. You can't see them normally. We couldn't pull those up in the field, which was very problematic. And also, it was very, very difficult to communicate with our customer base since we didn't have internet, we didn't have cell phones. Well, our customers didn't have that either. Another thing was power outages. We have backup generators at just about at all of our critical facilities and all of our pump stations out in the system. Some power restorations took a week to 2 weeks, so we were relying on fueling operation. Our water plant ran on our backup diesel generator for 5 to 6 days from the event. So just managing fueling and keeping those generators full became a huge operation and was very important.
Thanks for that, Adam, and kind of keying in on as you're talking about power there at the end. Jennifer, do you want to jump in from Duke Energy's aspect?
From me, what you heard from Adam as well. Also to add a little bit of context, like you said, I'm the government community relations manager here. So I cover Buncombe, Haywood, Madison, Mitchell, Yancey, and Avery counties. And this storm was so unique just in the path that it took, as we were watching it come in and watching it kind of make minor adjustments as it arrived. It became clear that really that track, Henderson, Transylvania, that swath to the north, McDowell to the east, was going to take a heavy hit. This storm was unique for us for multiple reasons. It touched every state within our service territory. And if you remember, there were two hurricanes as well in Florida, that on the front end, one on the front and one on the back end. And one other piece of context that I want to add was that pre-rain event that we had right before Helene rolled in. And for us in the region, it really came up and rolled straight into Helene. So it felt like one big storm. But we had 3 days of drenching rain before Helene actually started. So for us at Duke Energy, this storm impacted our entire system. So when we look at a typical storm roll in our response, it'll impact pockets of distribution or all of distribution. But Helene touched everything. So we saw impacts to our transmission system and major impacts like we really haven't seen before. We saw impacts to the distribution system. And we saw really a lot of customer impacts to their infrastructure, their homes, and the systems that bring power into their homes. For our transmission system, we saw lines impacted. We saw structures impacted. We had a lot of large vegetation down. And our distribution, I think what was unique to that is that whereas typically we see a lot of mechanical impacts, we saw a lot of civil impacts to that distribution system. So we didn't just lose a couple of poles here and there. There were areas where we lost entire swaths of land where the poles and the systems were located. So when we talk about restoration in that, it looks different than a typical storm. To put context to it, if you're a numbers person, at the end of restoration, we saw 19,000 power poles replaced, about 9 million feet of wire that had to be replaced, 13,000 transformers, and we had 23,000 field personnel come in from 19 different states, as well as I think 4 provinces in Canada. So the response to this storm was huge and unprecedented, which is a word I feel like has probably become overused here in Western North Carolina, but I don't know that there's any other way to describe the impacts and the response to this. We ultimately saw power restoration to everybody who could receive power and that could be accessed on October 18th. I do think that's an important delineation of everybody who could receive power and be accessed. So we did a lot of creative restoration and things that are not necessarily our normal response. We set a lot of poles by helicopter. We had crews. I'm sure many of you have seen the story about a crews hiking through the woods to try to restore primary lines to critical customers. And so being able to pivot and address restoration efforts in that way was really important to us. Like Adam mentioned, the communication loss for us had major impacts to our restoration efforts, especially in those first days and weeks after the storm. Our systems are also primarily web-based. And so when our crews go out, They're utilizing maps and our work order ticket system. Those are typically all done on a web-based system using iPads and other tools in the field. We were printing a lot of maps. So everything that we were doing went back to paper maps, printing circuits and people writing circuits and making notes on those paper maps, then transferring them to paper work order tickets. And if you remember, I said that there were 23,000 field crews. So the impacts of that for us were monumental. Just communication too, I'll add, our ability to communicate with people like Adam, with people like David. You know, we do a lot of direct communication and storm response and talking about, you know, what is critical, what they're seeing on their end, what their needs are, what our needs are, the reality of our restoration and what we're seeing on our end. And so we had to be creative and very intentional in those communications. And I think it worked out in the long run, but the loss of communications was definitely a challenge for us. And then I also want to note just the impact of this storm and the magnitude of the storm on our crews. We deployed base camp. So if you drove by probably any major shopping center, definitely like the asphalt outlets, you saw essentially huge mobile cities that we deploy. And that's where a lot of those crews that come in from outside areas set up camp, if you will. This is the first time we've deployed employee EAP counselors to those because of the length of the storm, the impact of the storm, and what people were seeing. And that was received really well and I think really beneficial. But it was definitely an unprecedented storm for us. I think I've used my time, Dan. I'll yield to David and add more later.
All good. Thank you, Jennifer. That was great. David, yeah, you want to wrap us up on this question?
I will. Thanks, Van. David Melton, Director of Water Resources for the City of Asheville. Our service area is about 183 square miles. We serve about 160,000 customers in Greater Buncombe County and in Northern Henderson County. Listening to Adam and Jennifer, it's kind of a mirror image of a lot of what we experienced. Certainly communication was a big thing. And we were watching the storm reports and the weather reports and all that as the storm was headed our way. In fact, we activated and started manning our city emergency operations center on Wednesday before the storm. So we had all department heads, all departments, all in one room, monitoring and planning as much as we could. We knew the storm was going to be bad, but we didn't know at the magnitude we were going to get it. And to tag on what Jennifer said a little bit about the storm or the rain before, it actually hit. We already had the Swananoa River was almost full. The French Broad River was already full. So the impacts were pretty incredible. A lot of what we had in our distribution system was kind of a mirror image of what Adam and his folks had in Hendersonville. We had a lot of distribution lines that were attached to bridges. When the bridges washed out, the lines went with them. We have one major trunk line in Swananoa, which was particularly hit hard. We had about 2,000 feet of 24-inch trunk line there that washed out with the river because now the river is several feet deeper and several feet wider than it used to be. So we had to do a lot of creative, quick thinking. We have good partners with Duke, and Adam and I communicated as we could once we got communications back to kind of support each other. But one big thing we had that's a little bit different, we've got 3 water treatment plants. We've got one in the south in Mills River and 2 in the eastern Buncombe County. The 2 in eastern Buncombe County are both direct filtration plants, meaning the water goes basically straight from the lake to the top of our filters with no pre-treatment. And usually those watersheds are so pristine that that's a pretty easy process. And both of those plants are gravity fed, meaning we don't have pumps that push it. We use our topography to our advantage in that situation, and water just kind of free flows from the plant and goes, or plants and go east to west. One of the major hurdles we had or impacts, we've had 3 transmission lines leaving our biggest plant, which is in the east, that serves about 80% of our customer base. All 3 transmission lines washed out. So we had basically our plant was cut off and totally ineffective if we could have treated water. So that like I said, affected about 80% of our population on the morning of September 27th. We were very fortunate. We've got world-class contractors that in Buncombe and Henderson County. I had 3 of those contractors sitting around my, conference room table Monday morning after the storm hit, and they said, "We know what needs to be done. Let's go to work." And that's what they did. We actually had to rebuild roads, to put water lines back, and those type things. We got, and also a major concern, we've got an earthen dam at both of our earthen dams at both of our eastern plants. So always in these kind of situations, the dam safety and protection of the dam is a huge concern. And that we made several upgrades to the North Fork Dam, which is our biggest water treatment plant. In 2021, we did a bypass line, which gave us that 3rd transmission line, which washed out. But that ended up actually being a good investment because the other 2 transmission lines washed out about 2,000 feet each. With a bypass line, we put it actually under the run of the river and washed out about 400 feet. So that was our first focus, was putting that bypass line back together. And we could do that a lot more quickly in the 400 feet span than the other greater spans. So one of our or 2 of our contractors, they had to rebuild some road actually to shore that up on each side of that bypass line to put that back together. So they had that back together and ready to go on October the 10th. As a part of the spillway improvements and that investment, what we did was put a place where we could put a spool piece in that we could actually send lake water straight to our customers if needed. And when we put that piece in, it was good planning, it was good engineering. But what we said, when the zombie apocalypse happens, we'll put this in. Well, the zombie apocalypse happened. So within 18 days, we had that put back together. And a big part of it was, and it's kind of funny, and I tell this for the presentations I've done, my wife looked at me and said, "David, I am tired of carrying 5-gallon buckets and pouring it in the back of the toilet. You've got to do something." So getting that line back together and sending the lake water to the customers, one, made that, and we called it flushing water, made that possible, which in my opinion helped avoid a health crisis, because it was my fear we were headed that way. And the other part of it that gets lost a lot is we had no fire protection during that point in time. So getting that put back together and restoring flushing water and fire protection was huge. Now we were under a boil water notice system wide after that, just because of the regulations and that piece of it. So that's a lot of what our impacts were here. Some that was a little different than other places. We were able to get potable water back within 52 days. As far as getting the lines back together in the distribution system, we did a lot of what Adam was talking about. We isolated lines. We're fortunate to have dual feeds in places where we could isolate broke lines, so folks still that could take water still have water. We had many that couldn't take water, where houses were washed away, and there was nothing we could provide there. So we had crews out cutting off meters and doing things to preserve what water we had going through.
Thank you, David. I appreciate that. And just, I've had a lot of these different conversations over the last 6 or 7 months, and each time I hear, yeah, a lot of people have similar stories, but still, it's just every time I hear it, it's like, man, just looking back to that time and the massive effect that hurricane, that storm had is just it still amazes me. So. Well, moving on, I want to kind of transition to now and what the recovery efforts look like for each of you now and your organizations and your utilities, and what are you guys dealing with on a day-to-day basis? And we can kind of go back through the same order. Adam, if you want to jump in and kind of go.
Yeah, sure. I feel like I can say this because I work for the government, but one of the things is the cogs of government turn slow and steady. I think the first week or two after the storm, we were not running like a government operation. We were getting things done very quickly. A lot of the replacements or projects that we did in that time, if those things would have happened in normal circumstances, we would have had a year or two of design and planning and procurement. Whereas in an event like this, we did things on the back of a napkin and just got things done. A lot of our solutions for lines washing out were just temporary repairs. We still have a lot of those temporary repairs still in service. When we get into the permanent repairs, when we talk about the federal government and FEMA and reimbursement, that's an awfully big cog and it turns awfully slow. So that process has been slow. We've been requesting reimbursement for a lot of our costs that we encumbered initially. Our utility, we're a decent sized utility, but we do not have the cash reserves that a utility like Duke Energy would have. So we are very mindful of how much money we've spent and how much money we still have in reserve, and are trying to get that as quickly as possible. Those are kind of the two things we're dealing with now on a big picture. And then, obviously looking at rebuilding for the future, which I think we'll get into a little bit later in this session.
And Jennifer, you want to jump in?
Yeah. I think like everybody, our primary focus after the storm is restoration. It's getting everybody back online, especially in the storm, because we knew it was a big storm. We knew that it was going to be a heavy lift and a Herculean effort to get everybody back on as fast as we can. So like Adam mentioned, for us, it's going back through all of our circuits and making sure that everything that was touched is hardened and that it's back the way that it should be. But we also had to deploy a lot of temporary solutions, whether it be, and I'll talk about our substations in a second, but our distribution lines, there's areas, like I mentioned, where we lost entire swaths of earth and we had to move a line a substantial distance and outside of the easements that we had for the original line. So in some cases, that new location makes sense. And we're going through and we're trying to acquire and transfer that temporary easement to a permanent easement. But there's some places where that's not feasible. So we're having to go back in and kind of relocate those lines back to the original location in a permanent state. And so that is a pretty large effort when you look at our entire service territory that was impacted. We're seeing a lot of those areas, of course, in areas that were impacted by high waters and by moving earth, where those geological events happened. We're addressing and going back and proactively addressing some vegetation that was altered during the storm. Maybe it didn't come down all the way, but we're identifying some areas where we need to go back and take some down so that it's not a threat during future storms. And then I didn't mention it in the last session, but we had 3 substations, 2 in Buncombe County and 1 in Madison County, that were severely damaged and taken out of service during the storms by high waters. And so the solution in the immediate was to deploy mobile substations to those sites. And so if you think about a mobile substation, it's literally a substation that's on the back of a giant tractor trailer. And we're able to pull those in and hook those up in a pretty quick manner within about a week after the storm. But those are not permanent solutions. So over the next year or so, we'll be rebuilding all 3 of those substations to be able to restore our grid to normal condition.
Jennifer and David, you want to finish up on this one?
Yes, thank you. I agree with what Adam said about the reimbursement and the whole process. As far as our distribution system, we have about 3 bridge crossings that still have to be replaced with a permanent solution there. One of our biggest challenges right now, going back to mentioning our 2 eastern plants or direct filtration, is turbidity issues that we've got. Typically, those waters had like a 0.5 turbidity, which made it very favorable for direct filtration. Luckily, Mother Nature's been good to us, and the turbidity is a lot less than it was there and then. Our North Fork plant had a turbidity of about 90. And our B-Tree had a turbidity of over 400, which just can't be done with direct filtration for either one of those. And if you think about turbidity, and everybody in this area knows more about turbidity now than they probably ever wanted to know. But it's got a multiplier of like 10. So there's a big difference in a force multiplier from 1 to 2. So what we've got in place now, thanks to FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers, is 2 temporary pre-treatment or pre-filtration treatment, flocculation and sedimentation solutions at both of those eastern plants. Some of the struggle we have now that we're 7 months past is typically those missions are based on a 6-month period. So some of the issue is working with the Corps, their subs and FEMA to get that extended. We actually did a study ahead of time that we were planning to go to conventional treatment for both of those plants maybe in 5 years, 10 years from now. But Mother Nature said, hold my beer, let me show you what I can do. You need to do that now. So it's that's a lot of the struggle doing that. That's fully designed. We're trying to get that funded. Pre-treatment for both of those plants is roughly $150 to $200 million project, which we don't have the money in reserves to do that with. And kind of bouncing back to the pre-treatment solution that's in place now, operation of those things for both plants is about $6 million a month currently. So that's some of the struggles we're working with now. We're able to augment direct filtration treatment normally through the plants, and that's being supplemented by the pre-treatment solutions. But our biggest fear is one rainfall that upsets the lake and sends the turbidity up again, would be a bad thing. So that's a lot of what our continuing struggles with recovery is at this point.
Yeah, and in our next, the next question I had was kind of looking forward, and each of you have kind of already spoken towards some of the short term looking forward, and and the question I know was directed towards short term and long term, but I think it's probably more accurate to look towards long term, because I mean you've spoken to what you're dealing with now, and what you're dealing with now is kind of the short term in the future, what you're going to be dealing with. So I guess more long term, looking out, what do you have, and in regarding, is it reinforcing? I know there's still a lot of just recovery that needs to happen, but speaking towards recovery and also reinforcement and trying to, I mean, I know trying to plan for a storm like this, which is basically considered a 1,000-year storm, is almost impossible. Financially, it could be done, but it's just going to be too expensive to do. So with that, David, if you want to start us off, we'll kind of go in a reverse order here, but what's your long-term recovery efforts, and where do you think those are going to go, over the next year, 2 years, 3 years?
Sure. And on the long-term side of things, what we have in planning now is we have those lines that washed out I was mentioning earlier, all are in the river run. So we have, we're working on a plan now to do an alternate water line that does not follow the Shenandoah River Valley, that gets kind of up and over the mountain, if you think about that, back to one of our junction points, and takes that all the way out of the river run. Designing that line to carry full plant load. So it would be a bigger line than any of the lines are there. So that's in conceptual design currently. The other part of long-term planning is we're looking at building a 4th water treatment plant, probably in the western area of our service system, because if you think about it, the 2 eastern plants are one ridge over from each other, North Fork being the largest. And typically when something happens, it takes both plants out. So kind of getting one of our eggs out of the basket is some of the long-term planning. I think one of the biggest challenges we have in our area is land, having a place to put it. And basically we're going to have to pump to wherever that is. So land acquisition, and those kind of things. But that's some of the long-term planning. And two, we're at about 50% of our rated capacity currently, which is normally a good spot to do. But really, if we don't start planning now, we're going to be at 80% really quick with the growth in the area, and be behind the 8 ball. So that's kind of what some of our long-term plans are now, besides going back and fortifying different things throughout the distribution system that we have now, like pump stations and those kind of things.
Yeah, and to speak to that, I mean, that planning and even the planning, the permitting, all of it, all that stuff takes a lot of time. So I mean, and trying to speed that up and I guess instead of going, Adam, do you want to add on from just to kind of follow along, water, sewer, utilities, and jump in there with what you're seeing, and then we'll finish this question up with Jennifer.
Sure. Yeah. And just when water and sewer facilities are constructed, resiliency and redundancy is a huge component of that process. I think that's, David mentioned having a fourth plant. That's just additional redundancy. If one goes down, well, you've got a backup, or, you've got extra capacity you can provide. Every time we put in a pump station, it's got at least two pumps in it. If one pump goes down, we can rely on the other. The more critical pump stations, they may have four pumps in them, right? So, we're looking at all those. We're looking at places where we've got lines out in the system, where we've got a line that is a single feed to a certain area. We're looking at, hey, can we feed this another way with additional pipes? So if one goes out, we can still leave this system in service. I think the flood levels are very interesting now. A lot of the damage that we saw was due to flooding in our facilities because the water got to the electrical panels in these facilities. So those take a lot of time to, one, get the parts to replace flooded electrical equipment, but also can we design and can we raise these electrical panels? Can we raise components? Traditionally, you're looking at the 100-year, maybe it's 2 or 3 feet above the 100-year elevation. There were areas that were flooded from this storm that weren't even, it was well above the 500-year flood marks. It was at a mapped elevations. Our office building in Hendersonville wasn't on flood maps, and we received flooding in our building. But it's very interesting if you're weighing risk at replacing some of these facilities, for like a 1,000-year storm event. Do you want to look at replacing or increasing resiliency of a piece of equipment that has a useful life of maybe 20 years? Or is that item available? So you really have to weigh the cost to improve resiliency with the risk. And I think that's really a big component of what we're doing now. And the other thing that, for utilities, smaller utilities, the grand scheme of things is funding. Our current rates, we can't do these projects that cost tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars and keep our utility rates affordable to the customer base. So really looking to the federal government, the state government, showing the need and the importance of water and sewer infrastructure, because we can't keep our rates affordable and do all these projects that are really going to strengthen the resiliency of the utility systems where we'd like to see it.
Yeah, these are very expensive projects that we're talking about. I mean, time is one thing, but then the cost of the planning, of the process of land acquisition that David was talking about, and then you're talking about the actual construction aspect of it. It's time and it's money. So, Jennifer, do you want to finish this up on kind of the looking forward long-term recovery and what you guys are seeing?
Yeah, I'd love to. And if it's okay, I'll go back. I know we talked short-term and long-term, and I don't think I mentioned it in the last one, but something that we're really focused on right now too is as our community rebuilds and is able to come back online, making sure that our systems and that we're ready to bring everybody back on, and we are, and being able to expedite them and prioritize them, right? So there's not a gap kind of in that waiting period of when they are ready, when they've done their rebuild, that our rebuild is ready to serve them. And so being able to meet them there, I think is really important to us in this region right now. I think as we look long-term recovery, I mentioned that we did a lot of temporary solutions, and I want to know. So we are in the middle of a 3-year grid improvement process right now. And so before Helene, we were a year and a half or so into that process, and that is hardening the system and improving the system and deploying resiliency measures like smart grid. And so if you think about smart grid tools, I've heard it described as like a GPS for the power grid. So when there's an outage, right, that GPS kind of tracks where that outage is and reroutes automatically. So installing infrastructure that's able to essentially identify and isolate outages and remotely switch so that that power can then be rerouted. It doesn't necessarily mean that there won't be an outage, but it means that when there is an outage, we're able to isolate that and reroute it pretty quickly so that we have a fraction of the customers that are impacted for a shorter period of time. And so those are measures that we were working on before Helene hit, but I think that it has emphasized the importance of those measures and deploying those measures out onto our grid for our customers. And that's so we will continue doing that, where we're going through and looking at those temporary solutions and do we need to move them. We're also looking at where do those two efforts meet from an efficiency and an efficacy perspective, and where are we already doing work and where we've already replaced poles and deployed new infrastructure, and making sure that we're not essentially doubling down, right? And redoing work. Can we do that together? So that's been a key piece for us. And then making sure that as we plan for the future, we're looking at the impacts of storms like this. And I think that covers that.
That can be really hard because this, I mean, again, as we talked about, this storm was so, I mean, even you talk about, massive, what we call, as an engineer, I'm used to talking about, 100-year storm, 500-year storm. I mean, this type of storm, you can't even hardly plan for. I mean, this type of impact that you're going to have, you could build something, but the cost of it is just, it's not feasible to build something to be able to, survive a storm, especially in certain areas. I mean, the way that the storm hit in certain areas, it was moderate to mild. In some areas, it was just catastrophic. So, thank you all for that. And, yep.
I was going to add to that. I agree. We talk a lot about building to the 99%, and then there's always going to be that outlier there, like how hardened and resilient can we get it, knowing that there might be Helene, and also knowing that, we hear like the new norm. I feel like that's a term we hear a lot in this region. And really looking at that, the build out of resiliency and ensuring we're looking at it, but that we're also being good stewards for our customers and their rates, essentially.
Right. Yeah. Understood. All right. Well, the last question that I had prepared for the panel was, so now we're about 7 months having passed since the hurricane. Looking back, are there lessons learned that each of you would like to share with the group? The kind of the hopes here would be that those in attendance might take some of these lessons learned home to their areas. But yeah, I just wanted to hear kind of what each of you felt on that. I'm sure there are. I mean, anytime things like this hit, you look back and you say, man, if we'd have done this, or we were planning on that way back when. But so from there, we'll go back to our original order. Adam, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah. And I just did want to reiterate, we mentioned the loss of communication, cell phones. We've become way too reliant on technology.
Right.
And, I can speak for Hendersonville as we did not have backup plans for communication, whether, just cell phones. We're going to get some radios. We're going to bring those back. We're going to start printing out more paper maps, so we have that available in the next event. But yeah, way too reliant on technology these days. The other thing that we're doing now is we have emergency response plans. We've had those, but I don't think in the past we did the best job training and going through those exercises. Obviously, the Helene event was probably the best. It was real life, real world experience, and it's a great training. But there's other situations, other emergency events that we're going to work on improving and training on. The other thing that lessons learned, and I think a big take home is really need to communicate the importance of utility service infrastructure. David mentioned, water and sewer, it's a public health service, but also it expands to, the commerce of the region. If there's no water service or no sewer service, communities cannot function at all. They shut down. So really communicating that message to the public, and that would in turn justify some of the projects that we're proposing and the rate increases that come with providing that resilient service. But those are probably the biggest three from our standpoint.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. Jennifer, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think mine is similar in kind of practice, practice, practice. So you know, we talk a lot about everybody has like their blue sky day job, and then everybody has a storm role. And you know what that storm role is, and it's practice. And some of us, our storm roles are very similar to our day-to-day roles, like mine. And then some people, it's a transition. You know, we have real estate agents who are, you know, running staging areas. Everybody has it, but the point is that you know what you're going to do in that
Right.
case.
It's
And you might not know where you're going to go, but you know what your role is, and you've
Yep.
practiced that role, and we know the chain and how things flow. And I think that's really important. And also having those agreements and having those partnerships set up in advance for things like mutual aid. Like I said, we deployed about 23,000 support crews and field crews, and that can't happen without mutual aid agreements in place in advance, for things like materials, having those agreements in place so we know where we're going to be able to import. One of the things I found impressive is that with all of those numbers that I read earlier, is that we didn't have delays in restocking for those materials. You know, we don't have 19,000 poles sitting on a yard at any Duke Energy site. But looking ahead, and again, I don't know that we can always plan for the Helene, but I think having those fundamental plans in place are just so essential to an expedited and quick response, and being able to get our customers back online.
Yep. David, you want to finish us up on this one?
I'd be happy to. I would echo a lot of what Jennifer and Adam both said. Communications were challenging. We had some radios, but we didn't have enough. So we've already purchased more and plan to purchase more. On top of that, we were really fortunate because the city had just revamped our emergency action plan and COOP plan and been doing tabletops and practicing those. And our larger departments in the city, like Public Works, Water, Parks, others, have their own departmental EOC. So we went through all the ICS training and all those things, and went through a lot of tabletops and actually spun up our plan a few times on smaller things, or real world things that kind of had us prepared where we could be speaking the same language with the fire departments and emergency management that were leading all those efforts, to be able to do that. So, but one of the lessons learned for us, and that's going back to seeking reimbursement and doing those things, we needed to do a much better job at using the ICS forms for time, for materials, for all those things, because we're having to mine our HR system and our timekeeping system for a lot of those things that we did, and our work order system as well. Staff did a really good job doing work orders, but had we used the correct forms, then we wouldn't be kind of behind the 8 ball, putting all that information on the forms where they need to be at this point to get that reimbursement. So that's a lot of the lessons that we learned, and practicing that emergency plan. And to echo what Jennifer said, in the water and wastewater industry, we have an organization called NC Water Warn. That's a mutual aid mechanism for the whole state. We had folks come from all over the state and help us put things back together. And without those mutual aid agreements in place, it would have been much harder to make that happen. So it's critically important. And the local partnerships, I can't echo that enough. Our partnership with Duke was fantastic through this. North Carolina Department of Transportation was fantastic throughout this. I mean, usually DOT don't want you to put their roads back together for them, you know. But it was a great partnership of everybody working together, to steal a football adage. We were all rowing the boat in the same direction, which
Right.
was fantastic. So I can't say enough about those partnerships.
That's great. Yeah. And thank you for that. And so that, again, those were the questions that we had come up with and then talked about. And I know, so those in the audience, I know we've got one question, it looks like, that's out there, but I wanted to go through at least a couple questions, and then we'll wrap up. So one that we got What are the challenges left to resolve in the lower population counties, specifically Avery County and other more remote high country? So for anybody there that feels free to speak to that. And I know David and Adam, you guys are in specific areas, so you might not be able to. I know Jennifer, you're over a broader region, but yeah.
I can speak to for our infrastructure, and I cover Avery County, Yancey County, Mitchell County, and Madison County, kind of in the north. And so I wouldn't be able to speak to other issues.
Yep.
For us, we're in the same place that we're here. Essentially, is hardening the grid. So I use Mitchell County, and actually some of that work goes into Avery County. Is doing some resiliency work there, and making sure that we're capitalizing on the opportunities that we have with planned work to then also address some of the resiliency work that we can do, like vegetation clearing, moving lines closer to roads so that they're more accessible, so that when we do, it will reduce the number of outages. But when we do have outages, our restoration times are reduced because of the ease of access. And so making sure that we're looking at those factors there as we implement kind of day-to-day work and planned routine work.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that. And right now, I don't see any other questions coming in, but I know one thing that we had talked about and through our kind of preliminary discussions leading up to this, we had, that came up, and as an engineer, unfortunately, more often than not, my glass is half empty the way I view it. So one of the positive things that came from our conversation was talking about the partnerships, and each of you, and David, I know you were kind of hitting it on there at the, into that last question, but there were so many positives that and not even through our conversation, but I saw across the board in different conversations and talks with those across the region, was just everybody collaborating to figure out how do we get ourselves out of this, and how do we move forward and row in the same direction. So so if each of you could kind of talk about the partnerships, and Jennifer, if you want to kind of jump in there and go, that would be great.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that stood out. We were all working relatively out of the box at times just to get things done. It was like there were so many different factors that had played into that a lot of us had never experienced before, and I don't think our industries had necessarily experienced before. And I think there were a couple of key things that stand out to me when I think about the relationships. Is one, like having the partnerships and relationships and knowing who to call. And not to oversimplify it, but even if it's just like a relationship, like a networked handshake at an event, that's saying, I got to call David or I need to call Adam. But having that, and then I think also like moving forward and with an understanding of what your partners do and what they need and what's at stake. I feel like everything in this event was moving at an unprecedented speed. And everything had kind of unprecedented consequences or implications, if you will. It felt like every conversation and every decision was just very high stakes. And so I say that to say that I think that ultimately having those partnerships, understanding what those partners need and kind of what's at stake for them, and then having the trust to understand that we're all moving forward in the same direction and that we all really are truly working together. And as David said, like pushing the ball up the same hill was really critical for a quick response and for us to be able to move things quickly. I think we were able to cut some of the red tape out of it, if you will, and say, okay, how do we just get this done? How do we just work together? And what other partners do we need to bring to the table very quickly? Right. Our systems became very obvious how intertwined things are, like all of the other industry partners that were needed to be able to get our systems back up and running. Like we needed roads rebuilt. What do we need to rebuild roads? We need gravel. What do the quarries need? They need power. And so being able to work through like that and quickly identify and call on partners and
and DOT is one that we were hoping to have as well on here, but we may end up having another webinar where we bring DOT and others on to kind of talk about other infrastructures as well. So for those that are wondering, I know here, it's been water and sewer, and we're talking about power, but there's other utilities as well that are, they're heavily involved in all this. David, I know you were speaking, towards the end of that last question about the partnerships. Do you want to just kind of continue up, and then we'll have Adam wrap it up on that?
Sure, to kind of add on the partnerships we were talking about, and I mentioned partnerships with your local contractors and things in your community. Also, it's your community-based charity organizations. They played a huge role for helping our communities. That piece of it. Partnerships with our regulatory agencies, with EPA Region 4, with NCDEQ. We were able to do things and think outside the box and do things normally as usually, and Adam will probably echo this, water quality is first. That's where our focus goes, both in water and wastewater. We were able to put that spool piece in and do those things with the guidance and support of EPA Region 4 and North Carolina DHEC. And I don't think some of those things would have happened, as like Jennifer said, if those relationships hadn't been built before, and that trust, and that it's like, okay, we trust you, we understand what you're saying, make it happen kind of things. So
That's great. Yeah. Adam, you want to finish this up?
Sure. Yeah. And David and Jennifer both touched on a lot of good things. And one of the things a lot of our partners, I think, realize very quickly, contractors, et cetera, is they put the restoration of infrastructure and services on the forefront. They, for fueling, a lot of gas stations were closed, and the general public could not get fuel. Well, fuel was available for the utilities, and they kept some reserve for us to make sure that critical infrastructure was still running. Also, a lot of volunteer base, the charities, folks in the public just wanted to help. We staffed like a big feeding operation for all of our crews. We didn't need them to be worrying about how they were going to be fed or their next meal. They need to be focusing on the work that needs to be done. And then folks just going beyond, like Jennifer and David mentioned, we had an instance where we had to rebuild a motor at a plant. Well, we pulled it and brought it to a motor rebuild shop and hauled one of our generators to that facility to power that shop so we could rebuild that motor and get it back in service as quick as possible. And that's just not something that, usually happens on a day-to-day basis. And folks really just, the community just came together and just got things done.
Yeah, that was again, I'd heard some of those stories along the way over the last few months, and again, as we were, kind of getting into this and hearing, I know I was kind of formulating this around people wanting to hear with the recovery efforts and the struggles and what you were dealing with, but then hearing that positive aspect of it, I was like, yeah, this is something I think is great for us to end on. So, David, Jennifer, Adam, I really want to thank you all for your time, taking your time out of your schedules to do this. I think this is a very important topic for people to hear about what's still going on, but also, for the lessons learned, like what we talked about. You can take bits and pieces of this away from and back to your areas and help in future disasters that may occur. I mean, of course, we all hope that they don't, but they're going to occur. But again, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Andre, who will wrap us up.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And I'll just note, I think I noticed that, maybe another question or two came in, but we're, out of time now, but I believe you will get any questions that we didn't get to today. There should be a follow-up email with answers as appropriate. So thank you, Jennifer, David, and Adam for offering your insights and experiences today. And thanks to Dan for moderating. We really appreciate the resources you all shared with us. I'll just note personally that this really does highlight the importance of community. I noted it. David said when he was sitting around the table with the contractors, they said, "We know what needs to be done. Let's go to work." Like that really was an impactful statement. So thank you all. These are the panelists. These are the ones that got the work done for us and really, I believe, saved lives. So before we go, I'd like to remind you to our upcoming events. Our next webinar will be on May 8th from 2 to 3 p.m., featuring a review of EDPNC's 2024 real estate report. Also, the Western North Carolina Networking Luncheon will be May 9th in Asheville. Next, the Triad Networking Luncheon will be May 20th in High Point. And then the 2025 annual conference will be June 11th through the 13th in Wilmington. Registration is already open for the Western North Carolina Luncheon and the annual conference. The registration for the May 8th webinar and Triad Luncheon will open soon. Thanks again for being with us. Have a great day, everyone.